Under the quiet California dusk, the Forrester estate glimmered like a mirage of beauty and deceit, a place where grief was always staged and truth was buried beneath silk and champagne. The announcement of Luna's death had silenced the restless gossip for a moment, but not the suspicion that followed. Baker's report had seemed so final, so coldly efficient. Accidental death, body unrecovered due to the fall. Yet it was that missing piece, the absence of the body, that gnawed at everyone who knew how stories like this never ended with peace. The public accepted it because they wanted closure, not chaos. But the people who loved Luna, who remembered her laughter, her indecision, her delicate yet restless heart, they felt a pulse beneath the tragedy, something that refused to die. There were whispers that the investigation had been rushed, that Baker himself had hesitated when signing the final page, his hand trembling ever so slightly. There had been no funeral, no body, just a closed casket filled with lilies and unanswered questions. In another part of Los Angeles, hidden behind the walls of an abandoned vineyard house near the coast, Luna breathed, barely. She was alive, suspended in a strange half-life where the hum of an old ventilator and the faint music from a forgotten radio mixed into her dreams. RJ had kept her there, not out of hatred but obsession. Once, he had been her greatest comfort, the man who had driven her away from the darkness of her mother's expectations, who had promised her that the city would heal her and give her a name beyond the shadow of her lineage. But RJ had never known how to love without control. His version of love demanded possession, demanded silence, demanded that Luna never look beyond him. When she tried to build a life at Forrester Creations, he watched from the distance, feeding on jealousy, convinced that the glamour and power of that world were corrupting her. When she became pregnant, it should have been the redemption of their love. Yet for RJ, it became the ultimate proof that she was slipping away. The day of the accident was never truly an accident. RJ had followed her, his car only seconds behind hers as she sped down the Pacific Coast Highway, tears blurring her vision, his voice still echoing from the argument they'd had hours earlier. He hadn't meant to hurt her, he told himself later. He just wanted to stop her from leaving, from running into the arms of the world that had stolen her from him. But control, once broken, becomes a weapon. When the cars collided, when the sound of metal screamed across the cliffside, RJ saw her body vanish into the water and thought that was the end. Yet when divers found no remains, something inside him twisted. If she lived, he would find her. And he did. When Luna opened her eyes weeks later, the world had changed. Her memory was gone, her body weak, her mind fogged by the cocktail of sedatives RJ administered under the guise of medication. He told her that there had been a terrible accident, that he had saved her, that the baby hadn't survived. He told her she had no one else. She believed him at first, lost in the quiet rhythm of dependency he created. The man who brushed her hair, whispered comfort, controlled her pills, her food, her dreams. But beneath that calm exterior, guilt festered in him. The baby hadn't died in the crash. RJ had sold it, traded the life of his unborn child to pay off the debts that came with his downfall, debts owed to people who dealt not in money, but in secrets. Days turned into months, and Luna began to notice the cracks, the locked doors, the inconsistencies in RJ's stories, the way her reflection in the mirror seemed like someone else's life. Fragments of memory bled into her consciousness. The sound of waves, the shimmer of diamonds under bright runway lights, a voice calling her name in a tone that wasn't RJ's. At night, she dreamed of a crying baby. The sound would wake her trembling, and RJ would rush in, holding her shoulders, assuring her it was only a nightmare. But the truth was beginning to return, piece by piece, as if her body refused to let the lie settle. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Baker began to doubt his own conclusions. A young intern at the coroner's office had stumbled upon a misfiled report, traces of blood from the crash that didn't match Luna's DNA entirely, a second blood type unaccounted for. It meant someone else had been there, possibly alive. Baker replayed the accident footage, the fragments from security cameras, and noticed a familiar license plate lingering too long near the site of the crash, RJ's. The man had vanished soon after Luna's supposed death, selling his condo, quitting his job, and leaving no trail. It was too neat, too convenient. As Baker reopened the investigation, the Forrester family found themselves drawn back into the storm. Hope, who had once seen Luna as a friend, began questioning why her grave was sealed so quickly. Finn, haunted by his own memories of near-death and resurrection, grew obsessed with the possibility that she might still be alive. And Bill Spencer, ever the opportunist, saw in this chaos a headline that could rebuild his empire of scandal. But none of them knew that Luna was less a victim than a ticking time bomb of truths waiting to explode. Inside the Vineyard house, RJ's paranoia deepened. He knew the world was getting closer. He watched the news obsessively, saw Baker's interviews, and began moving Luna from place to place, each time claiming it was for her safety. Yet every relocation brought her closer to realization. One night, as he slept, she found his phone. The messages she read shattered the illusion. Transactions, names, the sale of the asset, coded messages confirming the child had been delivered to a couple abroad. Her scream broke through the walls of the silence he'd built. When RJ awoke, he found her standing over him with the truth burning in her eyes. He begged, pleaded, tried to twist reality again, but she no longer believed. The confrontation was brutal in its quietness. Luna, regaining strength through anger, tried to escape, and RJ, torn between love and fear, lashed out. The struggle sent them both crashing through the remnants of the old glass doors, and Luna ran into the night, barefoot, bleeding, yet free. For the first time in months, the cold wind felt like life. But the world beyond the house was still cruel. She was weak, disoriented, unsure of what parts of her past were real. She collapsed near the highway, and it was there that fate intervened once again. Finn, driving home from the hospital, almost didn't see her. When he stopped and recognized her face, pale under the moonlight, he thought he was seeing a ghost. But Luna was alive, breathing, broken. When she awoke in the hospital days later, surrounded by white walls and questions, she remembered only fragments: a man, a crash, the sea, a child's cry. Baker arrived soon after, cautious but determined. He wanted her testimony, but the truth was still buried under trauma. And somewhere out there, RJ was still free. As Luna healed, bits of memory sharpened, not just of RJ's cruelty, but of his desperation, of the way he cried beside her bed the night before she ran. It made everything more complicated. Love and violence had become indistinguishable in her mind. She wanted to hate him, but part of her still remembered the boy who once promised to protect her. When Baker pressed her for names, she hesitated, torn between justice and compassion. The Forrester family wanted closure, the media wanted scandal, but Luna wanted only truth. RJ, hiding in the mountains outside the city, began to unravel. The guilt consumed him as the news broke. Luna alive, the headline screamed. He imagined her telling everything, imagined the world turning against him, imagined the child he'd sold staring at him with eyes that mirrored his own. His mind fractured, swinging between love and rage. He started recording messages, confessions, apologies, sending them to a burner phone he believed Luna still had. He didn't know that Baker had traced every signal, every word, leading to his capture. When they finally found him, RJ didn't resist. In the interrogation room, he didn't deny the kidnapping, the lies, or even the sale. But when Baker asked him why, his answer was simple: because I couldn't live without her. There was no remorse, only resignation. He claimed he had saved her from a world that would have destroyed her, that he had given her a second chance, that the baby was safer without them. To him, it was love twisted beyond redemption. The trial became a spectacle. Luna testified, her voice steady but trembling, recounting the manipulation, the imprisonment, the betrayal. Yet, when RJ's eyes met hers, the courtroom seemed to fade. For a brief, unbearable moment, it wasn't a victim facing her abuser, It was two people mourning the ruin of what once might have been love. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, she didn't celebrate. Instead, she walked out of the courtroom into the daylight, finally breathing without fear, yet carrying the ghost of what had been stolen from her. Months later, Luna found herself standing by the ocean where the accident had occurred. The waves crashed endlessly, indifferent to her suffering. She whispered the name of the child she never met, the life that had been taken before it began. Somewhere, she believed, that child still existed, and one day she would find it. Baker had promised to continue searching, though the trail was faint. The world called her a survivor, but she felt more like a witness to her own rebirth. As for RJ, in the quiet isolation of his cell, he wrote letters he could never send, to Luna, to the child, to the version of himself that had once been capable of gentleness. He believed that if she could forgive him, he might still find redemption. But forgiveness was a luxury Luna no longer offered to anyone, not even herself. She had been reborn from lies and fire, and now, every step she took was both a reclamation and a scar. The truth about Luna's survival became more than a story of love gone wrong. It was a reflection of everything the bold and the beautiful had always been about: beauty masking destruction, passion hiding guilt, and love existing only at the fragile edge between salvation and ruin. Luna's journey was not an ending, but a beginning, the awakening of a woman who had been broken, erased, and yet, somehow, still alive enough to fight for the truth. In the end, Baker's greatest mistake, declaring her dead, became the very reason she was able to live again, unseen, unburdened, and unbound by the illusions that had once defined her. But the question that haunted everyone remained: if love can destroy and save in equal measure, then what will Luna become now that she knows the cost of both? When the winter light began to fade from Los Angeles and the tabloids moved on to fresher scandals, Luna lived as though she had been reborn into a different life. Her days were spent in recovery, her mind caught in a fragile state between past and present. She no longer remembered the crash, the betrayal, or even the face of the man who had kept her prisoner. Doctors called it dissociative amnesia, a natural defense against trauma. To Luna, it felt like freedom, quiet, empty freedom. She believed she had survived an accident, that her family had sent her away for rest, that everything before her awakening at the hospital was part of a life best left forgotten. It was exactly what RJ had once wanted for her: a clean slate, a mind free of the memories that condemned him. But fate is rarely kind to those who try to erase truth. The memory loss that had once protected her began to show cracks. Sometimes it came in flashes: water hitting her face, headlights in the dark, the sound of a man's voice begging her to stay. Other times, it was more subtle: a scent that made her flinch, a melody that made her cry without knowing why. She was haunted not by recollection, but by absence. And though the doctors assured her she was healing, something inside her whispered that the healing was a lie. RJ, locked away, but not silenced, followed every report of Luna's condition. Through his lawyer, he managed to send letters, and signed, unsentimental, full of riddles and half-truths that he knew only she would understand. In one of them, he wrote, "Forget me if you must, but you can't forget what was never gone." The message reached her only by chance, intercepted in the hospital mailroom, but when Luna read it, a flicker of fear passed across her calm facade. She didn't know who it was from, but the handwriting stirred something deep in her bones. That night she dreamed of a house by the sea, of the smell of salt and blood, and of a child's cry that she could not place. As the months went on, Baker kept his promise to find the missing child, but every lead died before it could breathe. The buyers had vanished into another country, the documents forged, the trail erased. It became an open wound in the case file, something that neither justice nor time could close. Still, Baker watched Luna carefully. He noticed how her eyes darkened when the topic turned to RJ, how her voice trembled when she said she remembered nothing. He had seen victims before, too many, but rarely one whose silence felt so rehearsed. Finn, who had taken on her care at the hospital, sensed it too. He saw the way she flinched when certain medications were mentioned, the way she avoided mirrors, the way her hand sometimes drifted to her stomach without reason. There was a missing piece in her story, and Finn's compassion soon blurred into curiosity. He wanted to help her remember, but part of him feared what that memory might unleash. For every kindness he showed, Luna felt an invisible boundary drawing closer, the quiet terror that maybe remembering would destroy the fragile piece she had rebuilt. The Forrester family, meanwhile, saw Luna's survival as both a miracle and a potential scandal. Hope wanted to help her return to the design studio, believing that creative work might heal her mind. But others feared the opposite, that the pressure, the media, the weight of the name Forrester might pull the truth from the shadows. Ridge and Brooke had their own reasons to keep things buried. RJ's name was still taboo in their house, a wound to be ignored, not reopened. Brooke often found herself standing outside Luna's hospital room, torn between motherly concern and dread of what Luna might recall about her son. Because deep down, Brooke knew what everyone else refused to say aloud. RJ hadn't always been the boy they remembered. The signs of obsession, of control, of quiet anger had been there long before Luna's disappearance. She had seen the cracks in him, the same way she had seen them in men like Ridge before him. But love, in that family, was always easier to forgive than face. Now, she watched as the woman her son had destroyed tried to live without the memory of his name. It was both punishment and mercy. Luna began to paint during her therapy sessions, and what emerged on the canvas disturbed everyone. Abstract at first, then clearer, a shoreline, a wrecked car, a woman in white standing by the water. She didn't know what she was painting, she said. It just came to her hands like instinct. Each new canvas grew darker, more detailed. In one, a faceless man held her wrist. In another, a baby's cradle drifted out to sea. Finn saw the progression, and new memory was bleeding through. Then, one evening, while Luna was walking the hospital garden alone, she heard a sound, an old song carried by the wind from a nearby radio. It was the same melody RJ used to hum when he brushed her hair. She froze. Images flooded her mind with violent force. The crash, the sea, RJ's face twisted between love and madness. She remembered the room, the injections, the cold hands holding her down. She remembered the baby. The world spun, and she collapsed onto the wet grass, screaming a name she didn't know she remembered. When she woke, the memories had returned like broken glass. The doctors tried to calm her, but the dam had burst. She demanded to see Baker, demanded to know if her child was truly gone. Baker, caught between compassion and duty, admitted the truth, that there had been evidence the baby survived. Luna's grief turned to fury. Everything she had been told, every quiet assurance of safety, had been a lie built to keep her docile. And though RJ was behind bars, his reach still lingered in her psyche. The next day, she went to the prison. Against every warning, she needed to see him. When RJ appeared behind the glass, he looked smaller than she remembered, older, as if guilt had eaten through his soul. But when she met his eyes, something dark still lived there, a twisted tenderness that refused to die. Luna didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her words were quiet, sharp as glass. She asked him where the baby was. RJ smiled faintly, a broken smile, and said, "Safe." That's all that matters. That moment shattered what was left of her restraint. She left the prison trembling, the echo of his words ringing like a curse. Safe could mean anything. It could mean alive, or gone forever. And she knew now that as long as he lived, the truth would always remain chained to his madness. Baker warned her not to interfere, that justice was already being served, but Luna had crossed the line between healing and obsession. She began her own investigation, reaching out to the people RJ once knew, tracing his debts, his contacts, the shadowy figures who had bought and sold secrets like currency. Each discovery dragged her deeper into a world she didn't recognize, one of private brokers, black market adoptions, and families who built empires on stolen bloodlines. And as she got closer, she realized something terrifying. The baby hadn't been sold to strangers. It had been given to someone she already knew. The truth was almost poetic in its cruelty. The couple who adopted her child had ties to the Forrester network, a distant relative of Brooke's, someone powerful enough to erase documents, to rewrite the story. Luna's mind reeled as she pieced it together, the realization hitting like a physical blow. The same family that had given her a future had also hidden her past. Whether it was to protect RJ's name or to avoid scandal, she didn't yet know. But she knew one thing: her memory was no longer her weakness. It was her weapon. By the time the spring shows began at Forrester Creations, Luna had returned to the design floor, her smile delicate but deceptive. To the world, she was the reborn muse of a tragic story, the woman who had survived. But inside her, vengeance burned slow and cold. She was going to reclaim everything that had been taken from her: her child, her truth, her identity, and she would do it with the same grace that the world adored her for. And as the lights dimmed on the runway that night, and her latest collection shimmered beneath the flash of cameras, one could almost hear RJ's voice in her head whispering the question that now haunted her: "If you remember everything, will you forgive me?" Luna didn't answer. She didn't have to, because forgiveness had died the moment she remembered who she was and what they had done. But the real question that lingered in the shadows of the Forrester empire was far more dangerous. Now that Luna remembered how long before the secret about the child, and those who helped hide it, was finally